Hello, everyone, and welcome to Collab 101's module on high-performing, self-organizing accountability systems, Part 1, distributing power through roles, or more simply put, what's up with roles? My name is Cecile Green. I am co-founder of Round Sky Solutions and developer of Collab, and I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues, Rebecca Fisher-McGinty and Charlotte Root. In this training, we're going to be covering an introduction to roles and scopes, what they are, why they're important, how to use them, and we'll also talk about how to fill roles, how roles support accountability, and how strategy impacts roles. We'll also spend a little time discussing core roles and their purpose and functions. And we'll detail out how to create roles for your team, including examples, before we wrap up with questions and comments. If you've not already watched the intro to Collab presentation, I'd like to recommend that you do so because we'll be using some of the terms and concepts that we introduce in that introduction to Collab. As we get rolling here, I wanted to start big on one of the key principles for sustaining shared power. Make the use of power explicit in defined arenas of autonomy and evolve it as needed to stay requisite. This process happens through a clear process for defining what roles or scopes we have at play in our organization. When a team or organization has a reliable process for defining and evolving areas of autonomous power, it gains clarity, agility, and efficiency. Our focus for this training is specifically on roles with a little bit about scopes. And if you'd like more information, the Collab manual is a good place to go with links in the course platform itself. So what are roles and scopes? Roles and scopes are boundaries created by clear definitions of the work of that role or scope. Scopes are typically larger in scale than roles and have more than one role filled by different people. This means that an individual filling a role or multiple role fillers in a scope explicitly have the right to get that work done in whatever way they feel is best and report back regularly on their progress to their scope, with the option of always open to evolve the role accountabilities and to elect a new person to the role if needed through a participatory team process. This also means that any other individual in an organization may offer or be asked for input or advice, but it is up to the individual holding the role to make the call or decision. So let's go over an example. Here on this slide, you'll see the example of a website manager. I'm going to pretend that I'm filling the role, and I've got some accountabilities like monitoring web page downtimes and restoring web page as needed, editing content and layout of the website, and identifying and implementing functional upgrades. This means that through the election process, my team has given me the authority to do the work of these accountabilities autonomously. And I can come up with or be tasked with projects and next actions that fit within these accountabilities and deliver on them in alignment with my team's strategic initiatives. For example, it might be a team's strategic priority to increase our visibility, and one of the upgrades, one of the projects within that is to upgrade the website along with its search engine optimization. This would be my project as the website manager, and I would have the authority and accountability for delivering on that particular project. I'm also accountable back to the team for my progress by reporting on these projects during ops reports and participating in performance reviews. Concretely, this means that I'm reporting regularly on how the website upgrade is going, integrating input from my scope mates, and being evaluated on my performance on this and other projects. So let's take a look at another view of roles and scopes. In this image, we can see how multiple scopes and roles interrelate. Scopes contain multiple roles, and scopes are always linked in two directions, the scope lead and scope rep, which we'll talk about further in just a minute. This is basically a self-organizing way to think about our organizational chart. And I'm curious if there's any questions about what roles and scopes are before we go on ahead with how they function.
Yeah, I have a question. It seems likely that the roles would be held by one person and scopes made up of several people, like in this image. Are there cases where that's not true?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Charlotte. It is true that definitely, in general, roles are held by one person. There are always exceptions to this, and I'll give you an example. For example, if you were running a customer service department, you might have one role of customer server. And the key there is to make distinctions between how that role is delivered upon by different people, which will help reduce confusion. For example, you might have a night shift and a day shift, and those roles would be different on that basis. The other way to kind of disambiguate roles that are held by multiple people is to create a lot of protocols so that people are delivering on the work of answering phones in a similar manner. All of those decisions about protocols would then be made by the people filling that customer service role. And to turn to your question about scopes, Charlotte, most scopes are filled with multiple roles filled by different people. But when one is first starting a new team, that can be a good time for a scope to be made up of one person. Typically, that's the lead that kind of launches a new scope. And but usually it doesn't take very long for that scope to fill in with other individuals. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, Cecile.
All right, thank you, Charlotte. So let's move on to our next slide and talk a little bit about why bother creating roles and scopes. And in short, the great benefit that we obtain from developing clear roles and scopes is that we can confer and change authority and accountability collaboratively, meaning that as a team, we are developing the boundaries of autonomy as they work best for us under our unique circumstances. And we are able to do this transparently and through a process that distributes power. This enables me, for example, as the website manager, to express my agency and creativity in how I deliver on this role, and that I have the freedom to do so. Now, freedom is also corralled by the collective process that we can count on to evolve the role boundaries so that they continue to work for the team. So in short, roles confer authority and autonomy, and this builds ownership and creativity. Another benefit is that you get to know exactly what you are responsible for. Roles also help us rapidly identify which projects belong to whom, so we don't have to ask for volunteers or leave with projects that are unassigned. It also enables clear and rapid project reporting. And it builds appreciation for all the work that's happening, which it makes it easier to adjust workloads and reveal gaps and opportunities for new work or new hires. It also blends in with our performance evaluations and manages absences more easily. We're better able to see what's needed when someone is gone. We're also able to rapidly facilitate alignment around our strategic priorities, and we can scale our work by making it explicit and therefore transferable. So how then are roles developed? In its simplest form, roles are developed through tensions being raised and processed by all team members to new patterns, a new role, a new accountability for an existing role, and we use integrative consent to do that. So we all have input into that. These roles, once passed, are then tracked in a master tracking system. We use the master governance doc, and you'll find a Google Doc template for the same on the course platform. At the beginning, a team can use the role generation and review process to clarify all roles on their team rapidly, and we'll be going over that process in a couple of minutes. This is one important difference between conventional management and Collab. In conventional approaches, the manager is the one who writes out the job descriptions and passes them out, and no one can really change them but the manager, usually at their sole discretion. It depends on the manager, but in general, it comes from the manager. And as we take a look at how roles are filled, there are three main ways to do this. Really, election offers the team the most participatory means of doing this. Assignment by the scope lead may be the easiest place to start because it's often the most familiar for a team. And third, we have volunteerism as an option for informal or short-lived projects. The trouble with volunteerism is that it's harder to get someone out of a role if they're not doing a good job. Whereas if you're electing, that gives you a process for dealing with that more reliably. In conventional management, roles are filled usually only through assignment by the manager with little or no input from any other team member. So I'm curious, Charlotte and Rebecca, can either of you share an example of a time when lack of clear roles impacted accountability in an organization you were a part of?
Yeah, actually, I can give an example. I think this has actually been a really big issue in my work. We often would assign roles only based on the amount of time people had in their schedule, and we were all really overworked. So that was really dangerous for the structure of our roles because they became this just mess of tasks rather than actual roles that were clear for us to follow and a clear accountability. So it wasn't very strategically, it didn't work very well strategically. And I found it difficult to keep track of our individual tasks. And so we didn't have a lot of follow through and accountability.
Thanks, Charlotte. That's a great example. How about you, Rebecca?
Absolutely. One thing that I'm experiencing right now, one of the collectives I'm a part of, this is a huge issue. Specifically, I've been really confused about who's accountable for what because we don't have clear roles. And to be more specific, it's sometimes difficult to deal with communication with people outside of our organization. To respond to them because we don't know exactly what we respond. We don't have an understanding of how to take charge and be autonomous for that role. And there's no centralized check of accountability. We're all essentially volunteers. There's no head. So it's unclear how to keep each other accountable when people make decisions that harm the collective or vice versa. So we've had a lot of confusion around that. And then sometimes no one will respond to them because it was sort of everyone's job in the collective, which means everyone assumes someone else is going to do it.
Yeah.
And it also means that we're not able to appreciate or even know the work that people are keeping up with behind the scenes because those roles are invisibilized. And I think this struggle really, and lack of structure, leads to repetitive conversations around what to tell people and burnout.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Great description, Rebecca. Thank you both. And this really kind of leads us into our next slide, which talks about how roles support that accountability better. And so simply put, scopes and roles support accountability through having really concrete accountabilities. So these are specific work, parts of work that each role is going to hold. So we know, for example, using Rebecca's example, exactly who is going to communicate with someone outside the organization. Another means of accountability that roles and scope support is that our projects and metrics that we report on during ops reports are always based around the roles that we're holding. And during ops reports, we're able to kind of generate tensions, which get put on the agenda. And these are then processed to new roles, new strategies, new projects, and next actions. And this whole kind of system really holds together to build effective accountability between all of us. Projects and next actions are then tracked by the individuals who are holding roles. And the expectation is that every individual will be tracking their tasks. Projects and then next actions are then selected based in alignment with the team's current strategy. And performance reviews are conducted, and then based on these accountabilities and regularly, linked back to pay and a professional development plan. And last but not least, role elections are a really important piece of accountability as well, because we can elect someone else to the role if needed, if that's really a good solution for the team going forward. So if this sort of system was in place in the examples you both shared earlier, how might that have looked differently for you?
Yeah, actually, I think that this view of consistent, concrete accountabilities and roles is really important for clear strategic movement. It feels like it would have been really empowering to have a role with accountabilities rather than a collection of tasks that are not cohesive at all. And, you know, with or without roles, the suggestion of using an ops tracker would have been so helpful for my team to ensure follow through and tracking of tasks and projects. I just think that a system like this could have really helped our team move forward and feel less frustrated with our lack of clear accountability systems.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. How about you, Rebecca?
Absolutely. And it's something that I'm thinking about a lot is if we decide to establish roles with specific accountabilities, it will be a lot more clear about who is in charge of what and how that person or people can really excel at that role and push forward our mission. And I imagine that our newer members especially would experience a lot more clarity on how to show up with confidence for our work and jump in. And we would be better able to hold ourselves and others accountable and show appreciation for people doing awesome work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exciting. I look forward to hearing how it goes. And I'd like to just kind of segue into this question of how strategy really impacts the decisions that we make and how we stay aligned as a team. And in particular, how strategy really relates to roles. And so, in short, strategy impacts roles by clarifying which major initiatives are going to get our current resources. And once a new set of strategic initiatives are set for a team, and that's a process that we'll be reviewing in another training, the roles need to be reviewed for relevance, and new ones created as needed, or existing ones adapted to meet current conditions. And then each individual activates or backlogs the projects within the roles they're holding to align with that current strategy. Time and attention are then really put in on a daily basis in alignment with our current strategy. And this helps a team tremendously stay aligned, especially in self-organizing environments. So any questions on how roles function before we move into describing the core roles?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious who decides if a role will be elected by election or volunteerism, and what happens if the scope member assigned or elected does not want to take on that role?
Those are great questions. To answer your first question, in short, the decision about whether roles will be filled by election or volunteerism should be a team decision. So any individual on the team can bring forward attention relating to how roles are filled. The team would then take a proposal through integrative consent to make a decision either to elect or volunteer or possibly assign, if that makes more sense for the team. So the entire team gets to participate in that decision. And to your second question, what happens if they don't want to fill that role? And this is a really tricky one, especially for teams that are working under resource constraints, because there's often just a lot more than any of us can actually get done. And so in short, if a scope member has a real valid objection for taking on a role, and an objection being something that would cause harm to the team, to themselves, then that objection would get integrated, and either the role would be changed so that it fits what they can do better, or someone else entirely would fill the role. And the question that then circles back is, let's say that they still are elected to a role they're not particularly excited about, right? How do they relate to this work that's not particularly a good fit to them or for them? And the solution for this really is twofold. One is, first of all, ensure that there is a clear set of strategic priorities for the team, so that scope member can decide whether or not they really need to put time into that role or not, and how much, and in what specific projects. And the second is to to work to resource the team so that the right individuals can be onboarded into the team that do want to take on that role. So it can even become part of the role, that the undesirable role, say that individual will take on a job of locating a new individual to bring into the team. So there are options for kind of working through less than ideal situations for teams. Did that answer your question, Rebecca?
Thank you. That did. It really answered a lot of questions for me. That's great.
Thank you. How about from you, Charlotte?
Yeah, actually, I have a question related to strategy. What if the person who's holding a role or accountability has just too much on their plate and is prioritizing things differently than described in the scope or organizational strategy? Can the other scope members do anything, or is the person with that role totally autonomous to choose what they work on? I mean, how does the connection between role and strategy play out in real life?
Yeah, great question. So the main mechanism for this is our ops tracker and our ops processes, which are part of the standard meeting practice. And so during ops reports, every scope member has their projects detailed and an indication as to where those fall in their priority for the week. And we'll be going into greater detail on the ops tracker in another training, in the Scribe training in particular. But in particular, as they report, the rest of the team can see where their priorities are. And if other team members disagree with that prioritization, they can give that individual feedback. And if that feedback isn't sufficient to have the alignment with the current priorities happen, then it falls to the scope lead to work with that individual to align their priorities, or take priorities off their plate if projects, off their plate, and reassign to other individuals if really needed in an urgent situation. But yes, the entire team does weigh in on individuals' priorities. And as a scope member, I am obligated to listen to my team and rearrange my priorities so that I am in alignment with the larger team commitment to our strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Cecile.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question, Charlotte. So let's dive into core roles. These are a really interesting set of roles that Collab uses that contain basic leadership and management functions that are really required for a scope to operate effectively and efficiently. The value of clarifying these activities and defining them as several different roles and encouraging them to be elected provides a foundation for distributing power within a team without losing functionality. Frankly, in many top-down organizations, all the work of a team or scope gets conflated with the one person in charge. With clearly articulated roles, this is less likely to happen. And core roles are different from other roles, the other functional roles on a team or in a scope, in that they exist in every scope, and people are typically elected with a term. The expectation being that all individuals in a scope will be able to and be trained to hold the core roles. Other roles besides the core roles, the functional roles, are typically elected or appointed for an indefinite period of time, with changes to that, based on election, performance, or some other really good reason to change what roles an individual is holding. And each of the core roles essentially holds these different parts of the leadership functions. And you can check out the details on all of the purple core role cards in the Collab card deck. But let's take a minute and talk about them briefly. First of all, the scope lead is accountable for keeping an eye on strategy, our priorities, and is the default role for managing hiring and firing and coaching individuals into their roles as needed. The scope rep really looks out for the support and resourcing needs of the team and represents those in other scopes. The facilitator moves the team efficiently and effectively through the steps of the meeting processes, including decision-making, while the scribe is recording the outputs and also maintains those records outside of meetings. Metrics it looks out for what data we need to help stay on track and make sure that's getting tracked and reported on regularly. And the cross-link is only used as needed and links across scopes which are not able to effectively communicate using the scope rep or lead. And last but not least, we have the scope member role, which is the default role we all take on in order to perform work in any scope, with the very foundational accountabilities like attending meetings, reporting on progress, making team decisions, and tracking tasks. The core role of scope member is a powerful point of leverage for effective self-organizing because it clearly defines the expectations that we hold for each other if we are contributing work to a scope. Each team can add to these basic expectations. For example, at Round Sky, we also have a scope member accountability of tending and reporting on leads, in addition to the default ones that Collab provides. So how are core roles different from other roles in a scope? In addition to the leadership functions of core roles, we have all the other work that we're doing. And for example, in your admin team, you also have a bookkeeper role and a logistics role. And these other roles really help us articulate in nuanced way, the full work of the scope, in addition to the core roles. So at this point, we are ready to jump into role generation and review and what that process looks like. It's a way of rapidly articulating all the roles and accountabilities for every person in a scope. And basically, we're working on clarifying roles and their specific accountabilities, and this can alleviate a lot of conflict, confusion, missed opportunities, and mistakes. If you have access to the Master Governance doc, use the Role Generation and Review tab for a visual place to do this work. The basic process for doing this is to reflect on your experience working in your organization and identify what you are personally responsible for. Take some time to write that down using the following format and add more rows, add as much information as you need to. And have each individual participating in this process do the same. In other words, if at all possible, let the individuals filling roles provide the detail as opposed to having the one manager or leader doing this. So you're going to create role names, make these colorful and specific. I'd recommend steering clear of generic terms like executive director and human resource manager that really imply a large responsibility with little specificity. Now, let me just mention that executive director, human resource manager may be very important for your titles, your outward-facing titles, but they really do very little to help the internal functioning of a self-organizing team. So, once you have your colorful title, work on creating accountabilities. And these are specific arenas of responsibility. The syntax is an active verb ending in ing, followed by the relevant descriptors. You may have as many accountabilities as you need per role. Once you've kind of done all your brainstorming, then the idea is to have your facilitator take you through an integrative consent process with your teammates to identify any other areas of confusion, overlap, or any gaps. Make amendments as needed, and from there, once it's passed, further iterations and amendment of the roles will occur in the standard meeting practice as needed. Okay, so let's take a look at a few examples here of roles with accountabilities. These are simple examples. We'll look at a more complex one in just a minute. But office supplier, some very basic tasks like maintaining a basic stock of office supplies, answering phones, and returning phone calls. Now, this role in particular could easily grow to be a more complex role, say one of an office manager, simply by adding a little more detail to this. So this gives us a lot of flexibility to construct roles that fit our unique situations and also to evolve them over time. So another example is the Tech Master, which, as you can see, also very simple accountability, at least as it's written right here, providing assistance with IT needs as requested. And as many of you can probably imagine, a Tech Master could have a lot more accountabilities to their role, depending on the team. So I hope this inspires you to really see just how flexible and creative this role process is, with the goal of making this really match your team, your situation, what you need. Here is an example of a complex role example. And I won't read through all the bullet points, but it should give you a better sense of what happens when we're working with a role that has a lot actually to it, and a lot of specific items that the team is asking this role to complete. So I'm curious if Charlotte or Rebecca, you could share an example of a role and its associated accountabilities that you hold at RoundSky.
Yeah, okay. So one of the roles that I hold at RoundSky is called the Associate Cultivator role. And the accountabilities are determining RoundSky Solutions needs for new associates, proposing and maintaining an association process, creating an outreach plan, developing leads for new associates, and shepherding lead applications through decision by the whole company scope.
Nice, thank you. Thank you. How about you, Rebecca?
One of my roles, which is not as colorful as others, is the design and branding lead. And through that, I'm in charge of monitoring our need for branding upgrades and proposing changes, creating visual content or outsourcing that creation, and communicating design needs to our graphic designers, and working with our members and clients to generate content that keeps our brand consistent, fresh, and relevant. And then making decisions for our website layout and design.
Lovely. Yeah, and it's been, speaking from my own experience, just a delight to have that much clarity and working in those roles with both of you, and knowing which projects go to Charlotte and which ones go to Rebecca. And then likewise, knowing where does the boundary of my, input stop. Like, I might have some thoughts for Rebecca on design and branding, but it's no longer my decision to make them. It is Rebecca's decision. And that, that clarity is very, helpful for me to know what I can offer, to feel confident in what I have to offer her, but also to know when to step back and let Rebecca make her own decisions based on the role that we have elected her into. So as we wrap up here, I am just curious if either of you have any final questions.
I have a question. Do we keep a record of the roles anywhere?
We do, and that's a pretty important piece, because our brains really aren't meant as humans to retain the level of detail that we really need our roles to articulate. And so we recommend something just as simple as a Google Doc that is accessible by all members of the team at any time. So it's transparent and accessible record of the roles. There's other ways of doing this. Databases are an option, but a simple mechanism is a spreadsheet. And you'll find a template for this in the course platform.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. I was wondering, what happens if someone's not, following through or completing the accountabilities of the role that they are holding?
That's another great question, and one that I think happens on just about every team. And the answer is complex. In short, especially on teams that have way too much to do, not enough resources to deliver on, which I think is familiar for many of us, there are by default going to be roles and accountabilities that we simply cannot deliver on. We have too much on our plate. And the key is, are we delivering on the roles and the accountabilities that are in alignment with the strategic priorities we have collectively decided upon? Those are the ones we want to really care about. The other accountabilities, if they're not being delivered on, the key place to catch them is if it's creating tension for the team. If something is unworkable about it, it goes on the agenda. We get to process it and figure out what to do about that. It could be that we need to readjust our strategic priorities, or the the individual in question now has resources to deliver on this accountability. It could be the solution is different than that, but the team gets to kind of address it collectively only if it's causing tension. The third place is in performance reviews, and this is a place for us to, again, evaluate and taking into account whether or not accountabilities are really part of what our strategic priorities have been or not. Well,
thanks, Cecile.
Another question came up for me, and I find it really natural and easy to do that on the Round Sky team. And I'm wondering, what is your suggestion for bringing this to other teams that don't have a collab experience and background? And how do I bring that in? Because it will be so useful.
Yeah. Well, my suggestion is to start simply with initiating the standard meeting practice with your team and getting the team used to the idea of a little more structure around your conversations, a facilitator that has certain power that you've asked them to take on, a scribe, and so on, and to just simply step through these very simple, very useful processes. And once the team has had a chance to go through the standard meeting practice a couple of times, then introduce the role generation process, the role generation and review, which can frankly be a really fun activity for the whole team to go through with, big. If you're in person, you can put, big pieces of paper up on the wall, and people can kind of go around and brainstorm and get into, engaging creative dialogues with each other before taking things through integrative consent. So that, logistically speaking, I think is a great way to walk people through. But behind that question is also this question of, how do I get people even to consent to a standard meeting practice? And there, I would suggest a very simple invitation to your team to experiment with another way of meeting and make the argument based on whatever is not working for your current team. Almost certainly some reasons why you're even participating in this training and learning new methods for working with conflict and working in self-organizing environments. And identify what those challenges are, make an argument to your team on the basis of those challenges, propose an experiment to try the standard meeting practice. Did that answer your question, Rebecca?
It did, and I think I'll try it.
All right, so thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate your participation and attention. And as we wrap up here, I just wanted to remind you that this is one of several trainings, so please do check out the rest of the trainings on the course platform, including training on the integrative consent, the standard meeting practice, the scribe training, and so on. And do reach out with any questions or comments. And Rebecca, any closing thoughts?
I do have some. Something that has really struck me is the clarity of asking, does this fit in my role? Does this make sense for me to do this? Does this fit in my role? And also, I feel like I know who to go to when we have this clarity, which was kind of covered here, but also has been really, really empowering for me. And then one other thing is the elections feel so great to elect someone on your team about why they'd be great for this position or this role. Mm-hmm. So those are the two things I really want to add into this. It's so surprisingly exciting to talk about roles.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah. Closing thoughts from you, Charlotte.
Yeah, I think that the most amazing thing about roles is that everyone has all of the authority that they need in order to do all of the work that they're doing within the constraints of the governance that we've passed as a team. It's incredibly liberating just to have that be so clear and to just be given the authority that you need to do the job that you're doing and to do the work that you're doing. I think is the thing that's stood out the most for me in relation to talking about roles.
Yeah, Thank you, Charlotte. Well, thank you all. Take care. Bye.